On the 5th of November, the US presidential elections will be held. The election campaign, unsurprisingly, is going at full throttle. But between industrial policies, tariffs on China, and support for Ukraine, there is one issue that is gaining more and more weight in the political debate: the huge loss of residents in some Democratic strongholds such as California and New York. To give you an idea, between 2020 and 2022 alone, more than 700,000 have left California. And I'm telling you, this is a blow to the Democratic Party. And for what reason? Think about it. For decades, California has been a symbol of the American dream, a state where anyone could prosper. San Francisco is an absurdly wealthy city, with a GDP per capita that is more than double that of cities like London, Munich, or Amsterdam. But now, even though they are so wealthy, more and more people want to leave the state. And the question is, where are they heading? Well, basically, to states like Texas or Florida. That is, to Republican states. Of course, this is prime ammunition for Donald Trump's party. According to them, citizens are moving to red states because of the Democrats. So today on VisualPolitik, we ask ourselves the following question: what have these Democratic states been doing so wrong to force the exodus? Or put another way, what have the Republican states been doing to draw so much of the population away from them? Well, in this video, we're going to give you all the key points. In addressing this issue, the first thing to keep in mind is that this migratory phenomenon is not exactly new. We've been hearing about it for a long time. However, what has happened in recent years is that this process is accelerating. Until the 1990s, California was a magnet for hundreds of thousands of workers who moved to the Golden State each year. However, since then, only on a couple of occasions has it managed to attract more people than have left. The reasons? There are countless factors that could lead a person to leave home. But let's be clear, it's not that the weather on the beaches of Malibu has suddenly become terrible, or that a whole bunch of people have found the love of their lives in Florida. It's clear that the long history of democratic governments has had something to do with it. And guess what? If there is one thing that has characterized these governments, it has been taxes. We all know that taxes in the United States are generally lower than in Europe. However, in California, they are at levels comparable to countries such as France or Sweden. And it's not just in the Golden State. For example, it's no coincidence that New York is also suffering a population drain when it is the state with the highest local taxes in the entire US. And take note, because the differences in the taxes collected by each state don't appear to be gigantic. For example, in the case of income, California and New York collect a tax equivalent to 13.5% and 16% of personal income, respectively. This is a far cry from the 37% collected by the federal government. But what can I say? It all adds up. Taxes that are 5 percentage points higher than Texas may not drive a lot of people out of California, but they certainly don't help keep them there if there are additional reasons to leave. In fact, according to one study, California's 3% estate tax hike on the wealthiest households caused nearly 1 in 100 of these households to flee to another state, particularly millionaires in the Los Angeles and San Diego metropolitan areas. The tax managed to raise money, but much less than expected, 60% of the initial estimate. So basically, it's a cat chasing its own tail. The state government raises taxes, the rich leave, then the state collects less than expected, and what do the local politicians do next? Raise taxes again. But it doesn't stop there. It's estimated that in 2021, one of the years where California lost the most residents, the state's tax base was reduced by 2%, which is an absolute barbarity. Of course, not all of this emigration is due to taxes. In fact, this is most likely playing a fairly small role, especially beyond the richest 10%. But in any case, it could become a serious problem in the long run. It's not just a matter of the richest people themselves leaving, but they often also move part of their business and their activity. The result, as you can see, is that these states end up earning much less than expected, which in turn results in a higher deficit than expected. That is precisely why the governor of California is now saying that he plans to reduce the deficit in the upcoming budgets, that this is a priority. The question is, how is he going to do it? With more taxes? I'll say no more. Be that as it may, if taxes don't explain all this movement of people, the reason must also lie elsewhere. So what other policies do these Democratic Party strongholds share? The Republicans are clear: a soft hand on crime. Surely this is not the first time you've heard about it. The protests over the murder of George Floyd, the anti-fascist groups, the university riots, the last few years have not exactly been quiet, and many Americans have become accustomed to seeing their neighborhood stores with their windows protected by cardboard and their toothpaste locked in boxes with anti-theft sensors. This is no joke. In many Walgreens, you can see it perfectly. We've told you about it in many videos, but the fact is that something as simple as leaving a suitcase inside a car has become a danger. Still, for many people, the final straw came in 2014 with the controversial Proposition 47. As many of you may recall, Proposition 47 was a law that changed the threshold by which a theft is considered a felony. Up until then, if you took more than $400 in cash or valuables from someone, it was considered a felony. However, the law increased the limit to $950. In other words, if you shoplift $900 of goods from any store in Los Angeles or San Francisco, you can only be charged with a misdemeanor. And of course, with laws like these, which have practically legalized stealing, it stands to reason that many people can't stand to be a second more in these states. Or at least, that's the most popular version of the story, particularly among Republicans. But to what extent does this hold up? Well, crime is a very serious issue in some cities. For example, St. Louis, Baltimore, and Detroit. What can I say? We've talked about all of them here on VisualPolitik. Nevertheless, at the state level, I am sorry to disappoint your expectations, but the truth is that there is no clear correlation between crime rate and democratic government. Louisiana, South Carolina, Arkansas. These are 3 of the top 5 states with the highest crime rates, and they are very Republican states. What's more, it's not even true that Democratic states are more permissive of crime. But do you want a concrete example? Well, we don't have to go very far. Let's go back to Proposition 47, the one that does not consider theft below $950 as a felony. This change was very controversial and perhaps a mistake. But can you tell me which state has the highest limit? No, it's not New York or Massachusetts, 2 states that have been supporting Democratic presidential candidates in every election since the 1980s. It's Texas, with a limit of $2,500. Yes, the same Texas to which Californians are fleeing because of California's soft hand on crime. So unless it's the petty thieves who are emigrating, which I'm telling you is not the case, this theory of crime and the soft hand is starting to run out of gas. But wait, because there's more. The fact is that California's crime rate is lower than that of Texas and New York. Despite all the viral videos of subway attacks, the Golden State is one of the safest states in the US. And I see you coming. No, they only have those stats because they are so soft on crime that people have stopped reporting it. If we look at, for example, the homicide rate, exactly the same thing is happening. New York's rate is almost half of that of Texas. Now then, why is there so much talk about crime in New York and San Francisco? Well, maybe it's because being such densely populated cities, it's very unlikely that something will happen to you, but it's much more likely to see a crime if it happens to someone else. Also, it's not just the crime rate that matters as the perception of crime. How clean the streets are, how recent a mass protest was. There are many factors that make people more concerned about crime, even when there has not actually been a rise in crime. And one of the most relevant factors, unfortunately, is the number of homeless people you see on the street. And VisualPolitik community, in this, both San Francisco and New York get a resounding F.
New York has just reached an extreme level of homelessness. It already has more than in the Great Depression of 1930.
Many tent villages have been flooded with drugs like heroin and fentanyl. And let's see, it's not like these people get high and start assaulting the first person they catch on the street. But let's face it, no one likes to see these things in our neighborhoods. And as if this were not enough, it does not seem that the various democratic governments have been able to provide effective solutions. For many people, with their permissiveness towards drugs and monetary aid, they have achieved the opposite. But the real problem lies not in homelessness, although it is closely related. Why do San Francisco or New York have so many people on the streets? It's not because they are poor regions, nor is it because unemployment is skyrocketing. After all, San Francisco's unemployment rate is only 3%, while Detroit's is 20%. Yet despite this, the Californian capital has 3 times the rate of homelessness. The answer will surely not surprise you too much. We find it in the very high cost of living, and especially in the high price of housing. Let's return to the case of Texas. The median household income in this state is $67,000, 20% lower than in California. However, the cost of living is 37% lower. And this is not the most striking thing. Housing prices are 60% lower. In San Francisco, housing prices are so high that it's not uncommon to find Silicon Valley workers sleeping in caravans. But why on earth is housing so expensive in New York and San Francisco? Well, for the same reasons we have already told you about in countries like the UK, because politicians have basically banned the construction of new housing. To give you an idea, since the beginning of COVID, California has built 500,000 fewer homes than Texas. And in Austin alone, 100,000 more homes have been built than in San Francisco, Oklahoma, and Berkeley combined. The laws in California are so restrictive that in many neighborhoods, it is a neighborhood board that has to approve or disapprove the construction of a single dwelling, let alone the construction of new housing developments. In theory, these laws were made to protect the local community from a mega developer coming in and investing like crazy and ending up driving the residents out of the neighborhood. And in recent years, there has also been a lot of talk about reducing the environmental impact of these developments. But let's be honest, in practice, these laws do not prevent gentrification. On the contrary, they serve so that older people, who are the only ones who have the time and desire to go to these neighborhood meetings, veto the construction of new housing, and thus ensure that the value of their property does not fall. After all, asking homeowners in an area if they want more houses to be built is like asking a supermarket if they want more supermarkets nearby. Their incentive is clear. But these same owners are justly very enthusiastic Democratic Party voters. Do you get the drift yet? What's more, I'm sure you remember that California used to be one of the highest tax states in the country, right? Well, can you guess the one area where taxes are so much lower? Exactly, home ownership taxes, which have been among the lowest in the country since a 1978 law. In other words, in California, everyone may be super woke and very, very progressive, but when it comes to defending the value of their property, they leave the most radical Republicans in the dust. California politicians are well aware of this problem, but they either don't want to, or the few that do want to don't seem able to fix it. Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, has put billions of dollars into new housing construction aid outside of these restrictive laws. But the results? Well, you've seen them. Construction is slow. It's very expensive because, by law, the construction companies have to hire unionized workers who are few in number and charge a lot. And despite efforts to avoid neighborhood councils, in the end, they always find one loophole or another to paralyze the projects. The result is that new housing either never arrives, or if it does, it's so expensive that no young worker can afford it. And as if all these problems were not enough, the pandemic has dealt another mortal blow to these states that has further accelerated their population loss. We are talking about remote working. You see, until a few years ago, it was the people with less purchasing power who fled California. This is obvious. If what drives most people away is the high cost of living, it stands to reason that the first to leave are the less wealthy. But now instead, pay attention to this chart. Following the pandemic, the wealthy have begun to leave the state in the same numbers as people with lower incomes. Yes, it's true that they have also been the group that has recovered the most after the initial impact of the pandemic, but the numbers are still well below where they were previously, and the change in trend seems clear. According to a survey, 50% of the wealthiest migrants were already working from home, twice as many as middle-income migrants. Until a few years ago, this gap was much smaller, 5 to 10 percentage points difference at most, but the pandemic has changed everything. All of this translates to the fact that while in 2015, California recorded 19% of all tech jobs in the country, now that figure has plummeted to 16%, and this shows no signs of picking up, at least in the short term. It's now much easier for highly skilled workers to work at Google, Meta, or Apple, but from home, and their home can be in Texas, Florida, or even outside the US. To put the numbers in context, San Francisco hasn't seen such a large drop in its percentage of tech workers since the dot-com bubble. Not even the Great Recession of 2008 could compare. And remember, so far, the typical profile of a remote worker is not that of a Silicon Valley engineer who gets fed up with the city and retires to a ranch in Texas. We're talking about workers who have simply stopped going to the office on Mondays to Fridays. By now, cities like New York are losing more than $12 billion a year because these workers are consuming less. You know, if you work from home, you don't need to spend money on transportation or eating at a restaurant near the office. We're talking about a savings of about $4,500 per year per worker. And of course, as time goes by, this figure won't be enough for many people, and then they may think even more about whether it's worthwhile for them to move to another state. VisualPolitik community, taxes, and above all, the housing problem is what is behind the huge exodus that is taking place place in some of the most important and richest states in the USA. But having come this far, it's now your turn. What do you think may be other reasons for why people are leaving these Democratic Party strongholds? Is working from home a fad that these cities shouldn't worry about? Or is it here to stay? Will these states get their problems solved? You can leave me your answers down in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. All the best, see you next time.